Right now, at the very edge of Europe, a construction project is beginning that could drastically change the entire world order in the coming years. Spain's newest infrastructure project, and maybe even the most important one in the entire European Union, is aimed at connecting two continents not through words and treaties, but through real, physical infrastructure. It has already received support at the highest political level. The first millions of euros have been allocated. Leading engineering companies from across Europe have been brought in, and what is now being planned between Europe and Africa is more than just a construction project. It's a new chapter in human history. But to understand why this project really has the power to change the world, we first need to understand what Africa is today, and why there is such an intense global fight happening right now for control over it. Let's start with a simple question. How big is Africa? If you think you know the answer, you're probably wrong. That's because the maps we saw as children and still see in school textbooks have been misleading us. On traditional world maps, Africa looks only slightly larger than Australia, quietly sitting off to the side of the main continents. In reality, it's completely different. Africa covers more than 30 million square kilometers. That's more than Russia, the United States, China, India, and all of Europe combined. From the northern tip in Tunisia to the southern point in South Africa is over 8,000 kilometers, more than the distance from London to Delhi. But size is just the beginning. Africa's greatest wealth lies in what is under its soil and what grows on its land. In this new age of green energy, electric vehicles, and digital technology, Africa has become the last truly unexplored treasure chest on the planet. 90% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. 70% of the world's platinum, 40% of its manganese, and 30% of its diamonds are also found in Africa. There are huge reserves of lithium, copper, uranium, oil, and gas. Without African resources, there would be no smartphones, no electric vehicles, no batteries for energy storage, no solar panels. All of the technological progress of the 21st century depends directly on what lies beneath African soil. And that's not all. Africa has half of the world's remaining unused farmland, land that could grow food for billions of people, land that could feed the world of the future. And guess who is already buying up this land in pieces of tens of thousands of hectares? Of course, China. Because while Europe is still busy discussing environmental standards and democratic values, other players are already dividing Africa's resources among themselves. China is not just investing in Africa, it's building its own empire there. In the past 15 years, Beijing has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into African infrastructure. Railways, ports, power stations, roads, telecommunications networks. From East African ports in Djibouti, Mombasa, and Dar es Salaam, Chinese ships carry African resources across the Indian Ocean straight to Asia, completely bypassing Europe. The United States is not sitting idle either. Especially during Trump's second term, he launched a real trade war against half the world, including the EU, and at the same time increased the US military and economic presence in West and Central Africa. Washington wants to control key supply chains and prevent Europe from gaining strength in African markets. Even Russia, despite the war in Ukraine and all the sanctions, is actively working in Africa. Through private military companies, grain shipments, and arms deals, Moscow is gaining influence in the Sahel and the Central African Republic. In return, it gets access to natural resources and political leverage in the region. And what about Europe? Unfortunately, Europe has so far stayed on the sidelines. And this is exactly what makes the current moment so critical for the continent's future. You see, the European Union is now in a unique and very difficult geopolitical situation. On one side, it has lost Russia as its main supplier of energy and raw materials. The war in Ukraine and the sanctions that followed completely broke those ties. Cheap Russian gas, oil, and metals no longer flow into Europe. This means the EU urgently needs new and reliable sources of resources. On the other hand, during Trump's presidency, the United States turned away from transatlantic partnership and moved toward open protectionism. New tariffs were imposed on European goods, full loyalty was demanded in trade with China, and pressure was placed on European companies. This was no longer a partnership between equals. It became a relationship where America sets the rules. China is also not a good choice for a strategic partnership. Beijing is willing to trade, but only on its own terms. China sees Europe mainly as a huge sales market for its goods. Billions of Chinese smartphones, electronics, and cars fill European stores. But the trade balance is heavily one-sided. Europe buys far more from China than it sells there. Chinese companies are actively buying up European technologies and startups, but European businesses are almost completely blocked from entering the Chinese market. This is not a partnership of equals. It's one-sided profit. As a result, for the first time in 70 years, the European Union has found itself in geopolitical isolation. There are no longer cheap resources from a reliable supplier. There are no strategic allies who don't make threats or demands. And there are no global transport routes that the EU fully controls. Europe has only one real chance left to escape this trap: Africa. At this very moment, in the middle of a global race for Africa's resources, Spain is launching a project that could completely change the logic of the entire continent. It is a physical link between Europe and Africa, a real southern corridor into the future. What Spain is planning to build is a permanent connection between the two continents. For the first time in history, Europe and Africa will be joined by a direct land route, giving Europe direct access to cheap African resources without having to rely on competitors or middlemen. Whoever controls this corridor controls trade between the continents. But why wasn't this project built earlier? After all, the idea of linking Europe and Africa goes back to the 1980s. The answer is simple. Back then it was either technically impossible, politically irrelevant, or economically too risky. The distance between Europe and Africa at the narrowest point of the Strait of Gibraltar is only 14 kilometers. That doesn't seem like much. There are bridges in the world that are much longer. The bridge between Hong Kong and Macau stretches 55 kilometers. The Øresund Bridge between Denmark and Sweden is 16 kilometers long. But the Strait of Gibraltar is one of the most difficult stretches of water on Earth to build across. The depth in the central part reaches 900 meters. That's 20 times deeper than the English Channel, where the tunnel between England and France was built. Powerful currents between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea create extra engineering challenges. The region is also seismically active because the European and African tectonic plates collide here. This is where a giant clash of continents has been happening for millions of years, causing frequent earthquakes and underwater shifts. Also, in the past, there was no urgent political need. Europe had stable supplies from Russia, good relations with the United States, and Africa seemed far away and not very important. Back then, China hadn't yet become a global competitor. It was just a giant factory for the rest of the world, producing cheap goods using Western technology. The world was completely different. Today, everything has changed. Technology, politics, and economic realities. Europe has no choice anymore. Either it breaks through to Africa's resources and markets now, or it gets pushed to the sidelines of the global economy. That's why, starting in 2023, Spain began actively preparing for this major project. The government in Madrid allocated more than €1.5 million to carry out a technical and economic feasibility study for building a physical connection with the African continent. Contracts were signed with leading engineering firms, including the German company HeronConnect, which specializes in extremely difficult tunnel projects. Large-scale geological and seismic studies of the seabed in the Strait of Gibraltar have already begun. Monitoring stations have been installed to track underwater activity. Detailed mapping of the seafloor and analysis of the soil are underway. All of this is necessary to choose the best route for connecting to the African continent and to decide which construction method to use. The European Union has not yet officially announced full support for the project, but everything suggests that Brussels sees this continental connection as a key part of the global gateway strategy. This is Europe's answer to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a program to invest €300 billion into global infrastructure by 2027. But what will this connection actually look like? What technology is expected to be used? It's important to understand that there are several ways to connect the continents, and each one has its pros and cons. The first option is, of course, a bridge, a giant suspension or cable-stayed bridge around 20 kilometers long. It sounds impressive, but technically it's almost impossible. The depth of the strait in the central part would require support pillars nearly 1 kilometer tall. Strong western winds would constantly threaten transportation, and the heavy ship traffic through the strait would require extremely high clearances. The cost of such a bridge would be astronomical, and the risks would be extremely high. The second option is a classic tunnel, bored with tunnel boring machines. This technology was used to build the Channel Tunnel between England and France. But it also doesn't work for Gibraltar. The reason is that regular trains can only climb or descend at a very slight angle, no more than 2.5%. At a tunnel depth of 900 meters, its total length would have to be more than 100 kilometers, making the entire project economically unfeasible. That leaves the third option, which is currently considered the most promising, an immersed tunnel, or a tunnel made of submerged sections. This method was already successfully used to build the tunnel between Denmark and Sweden, and is now being used in the construction of the tunnel between Denmark and Germany under the Fehmarn Belt. The basic idea is simple, although building it is very difficult. First, huge concrete tunnel sections are built on land in specially designed factories. Each section is more than 200 meters long and about 40 meters wide. Inside, there are 2 rail tunnels, 2 road tunnels, and a service corridor. Then, using special ships, a trench about 50 meters deep is dug on the seabed. The finished tunnel sections are transported by sea in special docks, lowered to the bottom, and connected to each other with special seals. After that, the trench is filled in with soil, and the tunnel is well protected from external forces. This technology has several important advantages. First, it does not require drilling at extreme depths. Second, it allows the tunnel to be built relatively quickly, since the sections are made at the same time on land. Third, it has a smaller impact on the marine ecosystem compared to a bridge or a traditional bored tunnel. European engineers already have experience with projects like this. The tunnel between Denmark and Germany, which is currently under construction, will be the longest immersed tunnel in the world. It will be 18 kilometers long, and the experience gained from building it will be directly useful for the Gibraltar project. But time is running out. Every month of delay means competitors are getting stronger positions in Africa. China is expanding its network of railroads and ports on the eastern coast of the continent. The United States is increasing its political and military influence in the western part. Russia, through private military companies and economic deals, is securing its role in the central regions. If Europe does not create its own fast and reliable corridor into Africa within the next 10 to 15 years, it risks falling behind. Instead of having direct access to resources and markets, the EU will be forced to buy everything at high prices through middlemen. Instead of building strategic partnerships, it will become dependent on others who are more forward-thinking. Moreover, the Gibraltar Tunnel project is not just about transportation infrastructure, it is a geopolitical tool. Controlling such a corridor means controlling the flow of trade between 2 continents. It gives the power to set the rules, decide tariffs, and influence the economic policies of the countries on both sides of the tunnel. Just imagine, a freight train loaded with cobalt from Congo reaches Madrid from the Moroccan coast in just a few hours, and from there to any city in Europe. Or European high-tech products travel from Berlin to Casablanca in a single day, then spread throughout North and West Africa. That kind of speed and logistics efficiency could transform the economy of entire regions. But the project also carries deep symbolic meaning. For the first time in human history, 2 continents will be connected not by sea but by land. A physical link between Europe and Africa will become a powerful symbol of a new world order, where cooperation matters more than confrontation, and infrastructure is stronger than borders. This will be Europe's answer to America's isolationist policies and China's expansion. Europe will show that it is capable of launching ambitious projects on a global scale, that it can be not only a consumer of other nations' ideas, but a creator of its own global solutions. Of course, the project faces serious challenges. The construction cost is estimated at 15 to 20 billion euros. That's a huge amount of money and will require cooperation between Spain, Morocco, the European Union, and private investors. The technical risks are also significant: earthquakes, underwater landslides, and material corrosion from seawater. Environmentalists are worried about the impact on the unique ecosystem of the Strait of Gibraltar. Local communities fear a wave of migration and changes to their traditional way of life. Politicians argue over who will control the tunnel and who will profit from its operation. But all these problems can be solved. Europe has already proven it can build extremely difficult infrastructure projects. The Channel Tunnel, the bridge between Denmark and Sweden, and the Fehmarn Belt Tunnel currently under construction, all of these once seemed impossible, but they became reality. What's more, today's geopolitical situation creates a unique window of opportunity. Europe now realizes its vulnerability and is ready to invest in strategic independence. African countries are looking for new partners and don't want to rely only on China or the US. Technology has reached a level where even the most ambitious projects can be built. If everything goes according to plan, construction of the tunnel could begin in just a couple of years. The full completion of the project, according to optimistic estimates, is expected by the mid-2030s. And when that happens, the map of the world will be changed forever. Europe will gain direct, fast, and secure access to African resources and markets. Africa will gain a powerful boost for economic development and technological growth. The entire world will gain a new trade and cooperation route, one that can compete with the traditional transatlantic and Asia-Pacific corridors. It will be a revolution as big as the opening of the Suez Canal in the 19th century or the birth of the internet in the 20th. Because infrastructure isn't just about roads and bridges. It's the foundation of civilization. It's what decides who trades with whom, who has influence, and who controls the flow of goods, people, and ideas. What's being built on the border between two continents is not just a tunnel. It's a new world. A world where Europe once again becomes a bridge between civilizations, not just the edge of someone else's empire. A world where Africa is no longer exploited, but becomes an equal partner in global development. If Europe doesn't take this step now, it risks being left behind forever. History leaves it no other choice. The connection between continents will happen, because without it, the EU cannot survive. And when it does happen, the world will never be the same.